After all this time, now you come to visit me, brother. Why? To mock?
I need your help. But I wish I could trust you.
If you did, you'd be the fool I always took you for.
Some believe that before the universe, there was nothing. They're wrong. There was darkness, and it has survived.
What's gonna happen?
I gave you my word. I would return for you.
You face an enemy known only to a few.
Known only to one.
You must be truly desperate to come to me for help.
If we do nothing, they will destroy us.
You even think about betraying him.
And I'll kill you. That was from New York.
I like her.
Thor, your bravery will not ease your pain. Your family, your world will be extinguished.
We're running out of time.
The very fabric of reality will be torn apart.
I'll find a way to save us all.
All yours.
Anyone else?
And that was the trailer to the sequel to Thor, Thor the Dark World, the second installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe's Phase 2. Hey, everyone, I'm Elliot Serrano, and welcome again to another edition of the MCU ReVU, where I am joined by the rest of the MCU ReVU crew, including John Clark. How you doing, John?
Good. I watched the movie today, and I don't remember 3/4 of that trailer.
There you go. All right, we've already started. We also have from my Shaken Not Heard co-host Dave Pino. How you doing, Dave?
Pretty good. How are you?
Let's not get into that just yet, because this movie had an effect on me. And our special guest for today, he has been on Shaken Not Heard previously when we talked about the drinks of James Bond. Welcome back, Tom Jetner. How you doing, Tom? You can unmute yourself now.
Sorry. It's nice to see everyone. John, it's nice to meet you.
And yes, for those who've never watched the show before, this is the MCU ReVU, where we're going through all the Marvel Cinematic Universe film releases right now in order of release. So we're not going in chronological order. We're not going to mess with any of that. It's just we're going through the order of release, very much like Dave and I did with the Shaken Not Heard fan cast when we were going through all the Bond films in order of release. And thank you, all of you who are watching us on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, as well as on YouTube. Welcome, Susan and Lehman, our regulars. Thank you so much for being with us. If you are watching us for the first time on any of these channels, we hope you enjoy the conversation that we have. Please subscribe. Please, give us a thumbs up. Please share. If you discovered us on the YouTube channel, also please subscribe. Once we pass 100 subscribers, we will be able to get a custom URL for the channel. So anyway, all of that aside, we're going to dive into Thor: The Dark World. And I want to introduce a new segment to the MCU review. Since we're in phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we're going to start tweaking things a little bit, how we do things on the show. So we're going to go around the horn. We'll start with our guest, Tom. Tom, give me your 2-minute review of Thor: The Dark World.
Has problems, but my thesis for this movie is that it does a lot of the things that later Thor appearances in the MCU will pick up on and exploit to great use.
That was a 20-second review.
There's a 20-second review.
That was great. You have left our other co-hosts here a little more time. No, I'm joking. They don't get more time. They get 2 minutes. Dave?
I don't know if I could fill 2 minutes either. Yeah, I think this is the first. I was thinking about it. This is other than Eternals, which I still have yet to see at all. This is the only movie in the MCU. I think this was the second time I was seeing it since the theatrical release. All the other ones I had seen multiple times. Some of them I saw multiple times in the theater. Yeah, it's just it doesn't do a ton for me, which I think is going to be the prevailing opinion. It's a shame because I think we kind of teased it last time with them. John, you mentioned this one's directed by Alan Taylor, who has done Game of Thrones. For me, I know him more from The Sopranos. He also directed the Sopranos spin-off prequel, The Many Saints of Newark, which came out a couple years ago, or a year ago, which I really liked. But I'm not convinced he's an action director. So I'm not sure he was really the best choice for this movie. This is the movie where I think until Ragnarok came along, I think I realized I'm not a huge Thor fan. And then Ragnarok changed kind of gave me a new appreciation for at least the cinematic version of the character. So this is definitely one of the weaker, maybe bottom 3 in the whole series.
John.
I hate this movie. I used to be bored. This is definitely the MCU in a period of transition. They have yet to create a formula that they less inspired for entertaining movies. And this movie has problems. I feel like it's over. It feels like it's 3.5 hours long. Going into this movie, I saw this in the theater. I agree with you, Dave. One of the Marvel characters for me that what I call the reggae rule. It's in that when people that want to listen to reggae, if you listen to Bob Marley, you're done. You don't need to go find other reggae people to listen to. And Thor is one of those where it's like Walt Simonson, I've read that I've done. It's like like Spider-Man, everything. And because there's not a lot of the character that really draws me in. And this movie just absolutely proves that, because there's just nothing in this movie pulls me in.
Yeah. John, for the purposes of editing this for the podcast, your sound really dropped there until you got to Spider-Man. And I think at that point, that's when
I became animated again.
That's when you became animated. So
can't we just talk about Spider-Man?
Can we go back and
that would make life easier?
Encapsulate again, and then you'll know this is the point where you can start again, boom, and for the editing the podcast.
I hate this movie. Go on, move on.
All right. My 2-minute review, and Dave, I'll say this. I'll include this. The fact Dave messaged me yesterday and said, Elliot, I don't know how long the show is going to be or how long I can be on, because I really can't think of a lot to say about this movie. To which I responded, that's okay. I'm in a really shitty mood right now, and chances are I'm just going to get drunk during the show. And that's when I saw the first half. I didn't finish watching it. Now, today I was in a significantly better mood, I still want to just get drunk during the show.
We talk about drinks. So what are we drinking?
Yeah, so we're bringing in, for those of you who have been if you've been following the Facebook page and the MCU ReVU Instagram, we did share a recipe for a drink that I believe Tom and Dave are having now as we watch. Tom, Dave said you're not going to be able to find a lot of these ingredients, and he was right. I couldn't.
They're readily available within the Chicagoland area if you're willing to do a little bit of looking.
They were not readily available in my kitchen. That was I was like, oh, none of this.
I was tasked with trying to create a Thor themed cocktail, and so I tried to think of the Viking Age, which is the period from, depending on how you date it, usually they like to say the raid at Lindisfarne in 793 until the defeat by the army of Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge at 1066. But that's before distilling, and it's before citrus. So, it's a little bit tough. So I had to get a little bit creative. So I'll show everyone what I'm drinking right here. Let's see if I can get him here. So this is something that I've called the Hugin and Mugen. Hugin and Moonin, excuse me. And it is equal parts gin, specifically gin from Ireland, and specifically gin from Dublin, Ireland, because Dublin was largely founded as a Viking settlement. It was a major trading post over the course of the Viking Age, and even had paved streets. It was one of the larger. There it is. It is 1 part of Leatherby Basque, which is kind of like, it's like Malort, but if Malort wasn't Malort. So it's better than Malort. It has a different. It's like if Malort was good, and not something we Chicagoans inflict upon ourselves. And then the Koval Distillery here in Chicago makes 2 liqueurs, which are excellent. They make a honey chrysanthemum liqueur, and that's included because the Vikings did have honey, and mead, which is a honey wine, was the drink that vanquished Viking warriors would expect to drink in Odin's Hall at Valhalla. And then the final ingredient is Koval makes a rose hip liqueur. And rose hips are very common in Scandinavia, and they were part of the they've been found at various Norse sites from the Middle Ages, and they were a common fruit. And really, they're there to add a little bit more sweetness to what is otherwise a fairly dry drink, apart from the honey. And then it's garnished with a sprig of sage and a sprig of thyme. Again, because I couldn't do any citrus, because citrus is Mediterranean, and that comes in through the Arab conquest, and that's much, much later, before citrus really makes it that far north. And they didn't even have distilling until about the 15th century. So we're about 400 to 500 years, depending on where you are, from the process of distilling really becoming a thing. So a lot of liqueurs, but I also couldn't really use vermouth that much, even though that the Vikings did come close to and conquered sections of France and got down as far as Constantinople. I don't know. I felt like a wine-based spirit wasn't really appropriate. And it's called the Hugin and Moonin because Hugin and Moonin were Odin's ravens. And you can actually see a reference to that in the first Avengers movie, in the scene where Thor is interrogating Loki for the first time on that kind of mountain side. There you hear a double raven caw. And you see 2 black birds in flight. And that's a reference to Odin's ravens coming in at that particular point in the movie. And The Koval and Leatherby distilleries, of which this drink, the majority of this drink comes from, are located on opposite sides of Ravenswood Avenue in Chicago.
Wow, that you went deep levels. You went like into serious, levels that no one would anyone else would go into. That's why we have you on this show.
Big thanks to my wife.
Nothing less from Tom.
Big thanks to my wife for helping me beta test this and kind of figure out what actually tastes good in a drink.
So how did it taste? What's the flavor, the taste profile like?
It's a lot like a Negroni, but it's got that a little more of a licorice, like a black licorice aftertaste.
Okay.
And it kind of flowed like layered on top of that. Like if you can imagine the way a Negroni tastes, and if you dial back the citrus, because in the Campari you have more bitter from citrus peels, I believe, in that liqueur. So if you dialed that down and you added in a little bit of that kind of licorice anise flavor, that's what comes from the Basque, which on its own kind of tastes a lot like absinthe, if you've tasted absinthe before. Yeah. So it's surprisingly light. For a drink that has a double dose of liqueur in it, it's not that syrupy. As a kind of what you might expect for sometimes they get a vermouth and it can be kind of a little bit syrupy, but it's pretty light and very herbal from the herbs in the liqueurs and in the gin. The gin is Halfpenny Dublin Dry Gin, which is actually my first time trying it. It's actually quite floral and nice and kind of pleasant as far as gins go. So it's very floral, very herbal, very aromatic. So if you like that kind of drink, that might be something for you to try or to seek out.
Cool. So if you're watching us, if you're watching us on Twitch or YouTube, that recipe that we have up here can be found on the Facebook page as well as the Instagram. And so just go to MCU ReVU. If you go to the Instagram page, it's MCU_ReVU. When Dave sent me the recipe, it was called the Norse Negroni, and then Tom said, I've changed the name. Didn't have enough time to change the title on it, but there's a recipe, and next time we'll try to work on getting our things a little more accurately titled. We've already spent more time talking about the drink than the movie itself.
The drink is better than the movie.
It's funny you should say that Taika Waititi will pick up on some things in Thor: The Dark World, and it seems to me that with the first two Thor films, they really were trying to be more faithful to the comic book version of Thor. I'm going to be honest with you, folks. If you pick up a Thor comic book expecting to get any of the humor that you saw in
Ragnarok,
that ain't going to happen. That is not going to happen. If right now, if anything, with Jason Aaron writing Thor, it's gotten even darker and grittier. I mean, Thor is like real gritty right now, and there's not a whole lot of whimsy. Then Chris Hemsworth does the Ghostbusters reboot. Suddenly, everyone discovers the dude's really funny. He can do comedy like nobody knew, and they really play and lean into that in Ragnarok. Not entirely, because then you get to, of course, Avengers Endgame, and then we get the tortured, self-doubting Thor, which
but we'll also get Fat Bro Thor, which is hilarious. You're right. It's ironic that the Paul Feig Ghostbusters, which was not well received, has the side effect of completely revolutionizing this franchise. Because you're right, this is a movie that feels like it doesn't quite know what to do. The first film that Kenneth Branagh directed was a little schizophrenic, where the Asgard stuff was very gold and polished and Shakespearean, and then the desert stuff with Natalie Portman was very funny and true to life. This seems like it's trying to be somewhere in between, and it can't quite land it. There's jokes in here, but not. I noticed this time. There is not one joke that is tied to the character or plot. They just seem to come out of nowhere. You know, like we throw Chris O'Dowd in, who's great, but there's no reason for him to be in this movie. Most of the things Darcy has to say, Kat Dennings, she makes out with her intern at one point. It has nothing to do with anything. Dr. Selvig is running around naked. I was like, that's tied to nothing, because when they come to get him at the mental institution, he's okay. He's fine. He told Stan Lee about his shoe, which showed he was okay before we went back to see if he was okay. So I feel like that was Kevin Feige just saying, people expect jokes in our movies because of Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau. So just start throwing in jokes. But they're really random, and the tone of this does not support comedy at all.
You guys remember if Ragnarok, was that before or after the Men in Black? Well, it wasn't really a reboot, but the one they did with him and Tessa Thompson.
It was before, because Ragnarok is the first time Tessa Thompson and Chris Hemsworth were teamed up, and I think Men in Black tried to capitalize on that. Also, not
before Men in Black. Is that what you said?
Before their Men in Black.
Okay.
Yeah, I think at this point we're just a year or two after the Josh Brolin, Will Smith Men in Black. Back when we were willing to look at Will Smith.
And also, the Thor: The Dark World would be the film that also changes directors. And Patty Jenkins, who will later go on to do the next two Wonder Woman films, was slated to direct this one, but ended up parting ways with Marvel over the commonly spoken for creative differences, which makes me wonder what the actual creative differences were. When you see that Thor: The Dark World actually tried to focus a little more on Jane Foster here, give Kat Dennings a little bit more to do than in the first one. Even at the end, where it looks like Jane Foster needs to rescue Thor, not make it so much that Jane is someone who's constantly needing of rescue. But maybe, maybe Patty Jenkins wanted to focus more on their characters, but they're saying, no, it's a Thor movie, and it's got to be funny. It can't be too girly. I don't know. I would have loved to have been a fly on that wall.
Well, it's interesting because I was reading an interview with Bruce Campbell this week, who is talking about Doctor Strange 2, which, as we're recording this, is going to come out next week. That's directed by Sam Raimi, who, of course, directed the 3 Spider-Mans and the Evil Dead movies with Bruce Campbell. And they asked Bruce Campbell if Sam was done with it. And he said Sam doesn't know if he's done with it because Marvel keeps giving you changes, and that's the way these movies work. And he hinted at the fact that because of the release dates shifting with the pandemic, we were supposed to get Doctor Strange before we got No Way Home, which Doctor Strange is in. And it sounded like Marvel went back to Sam Raimi and went, hey, No Way Home is out. So these scenes are out. Rewrite these scenes, do these scenes. And Thor: Dark World kind of feels like that. I noticed at the end when they reveal that the ether is an Infinity Stone, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a liquid. Like the whole movie. And I feel like it was just tacked on at the end. They were like, hey, we figured out we're going to do the Infinity Gauntlet. So every MacGuffin in here is an Infinity Stone. Because there's nothing in the ether that feels like an Infinity Stone. And I think it's changes like that and probably the whip crack timing that they come in. That could have been what Patty Jenkins gave up on. Certainly a lot of that is what Edgar Wright pointed to when he quit Ant-Man.
Which stone was that? What, the Power Stone or
Reality?
Reality Stone?
Reality Stone. It's the red stone.
Okay.
I heard about it. Yeah.
I'll say then Malekith should have been in not so easy to beat because the Reality Stone was doing shit that Malekith was not doing.
This movie has a villain problem.
Yes.
That was the first thing that I thought when I was kind of rewatching this movie is just like boy, you've got the 9th Doctor out there and he's just boring. Like he doesn't really have a motivation or anything like that. Like there's like I think they pegged that Malekith was going to be the villain before they even touched pen to paper to write this, because he's one of in the Thor canon, he's one of the villains that you go to, kind of like Loki. But something with the design of the Dark Elves themselves, I don't know who actually designed those like doll faces with the ears coming out of the side, but and they give them some of the best weaponry that the bad guy, they have that like black hole grenade, but they never come, I don't know what, something with the faces, it just doesn't come off as like a scary, they look like the Putty Patrol from Power Rangers.
Yeah.
I'm going, Malekith is like, well, first Odin says in the preamble, that the universe wasn't always light. It was before it was darkness, and the Dark Elves, ruled then. So there was no light back then, no light. So I'm guessing this is like alluding to, like, say, the time before the Big Bang, so pre-creation, so to speak. The Dark Elves ruled. Fine. My first question is, if they like the dark so much, why do their weapons light up? Because they were shooting those bright laser guns. I'm like, but you're Dark Elves. You should hate light. What's that? 2, if the convergence happens every 5,000 years, do you know how many times that convergence has happened since the beginning of creation to now? Like, divide 1 billion times 5,000. And you're going to get a lot of chances along the way to make shit happen, even long before Odin and his grandfather came along. So there were a lot of, you're right. And then Chris Eccleston is utterly wasted in this film. I thought that the time I saw it in the theater. I thought that again watching it here. I didn't get his motivation. I didn't get what the powers were. I mean, essentially, if this ether is supposed to be this invincible weapon that you can't even destroy, you have to bury it, so to speak, as they say in the beginning. All it is matter manipulation, and there are how many other weapons that do that too, And if it's the reality stone, as you say, Thanos knew how to use it a lot better than Malekith did, and the Dark Elves supposedly invented that thing. So you're right. The villain problem, as we'll find throughout the MCU films just don't know how to make compelling villains. They're really good with the heroes. Unlike DC, where they're real good creating memorable villains, they just can't make their heroes very memorable.
Well, they'll figure out the villains as we go along. But Chris Eccleston breaks my heart in this movie, because this was also made around the time that they did the Doctor Who 50th anniversary, which paired Matt Smith and David Tennant. Maybe the last great Doctor Who episode that we got, and Chris Eccleston declined to participate in it. He never quite gave a satisfying reason. And they always said that he didn't get along with Russell T Davies, but Russell T Davies didn't do the 50th anniversary. He was nowhere near the franchise at this point. So, and then one of the excuses at the time was, he can't be in the Doctor Who 50th anniversary because he's going to be in Thor: The Dark World. And I remember in the theater, they basically gave William Hurt his part and had to create this entire new appendix to the franchise to bring in a doctor that we had never seen before, just to read Christopher Eccleston's lines. And then sitting in the theater, I was like, okay, this is why we got to compromise Doctor Who 50th anniversary. This is going to be great. And you're right, he's a stuntman in this. He's basically a mime. He's shot from 2 angles. He says everything in an elf language. He's the same kind of angry the whole way through. He's so wasted, and we could have had him where he belonged at that moment instead of here.
Well, two things, as you make some great points there, John. 2 things to kind of build on top of that is that you've got a guy who is capable of being, as we saw in Doctor Who, of being big on screen. And if there's a lesson to be learned from the Thor movies that have come out, it's the villains need to be big. You need a Loki, you need a
Jeff Goldblum.
Hela, Jeff Goldblum, who is larger than life, and Kate Blanchett being able to just vamp all over the screen, or I guess you would count Thanos as well. You need a larger than life villain to go against a god, and here you have someone who has a lot of experience in being exactly that character, and he's not allowed to do that. And I think the other problem that comes up is a point that Elliot made on how, like, the elves, like, they don't like darkness. They don't like the light, but we never see them be affected by the light. Like, they just show up in broad daylight on Asgard, and it's not like a vampire thing where they're like trying to like get out of the sunlight or where they're affected by light in any way. It's just they don't like it for reasons. It's like they're not in pain or anything like that under the light. It doesn't seem to bother them or affect them. They show up in London and it's cloudy, but it's still daytime, and they're not affected by it. So there's that whole element of the villain motivation. Like if it had been like a vampire thing where it's like they can't be in the light because it physically hurts them, or like the monsters in Pitch Black, where it would like sear their skin or something like that if they're ever actually exposed to it. Like then you could understand why they would want to turn the universe back to darkness, and because it physically hurts them. But here it's just like they don't like it because they don't like it.
My guess is the Dark Elves are just like the Republicans who want to turn America back to the 1950s. You know, back to when America was what we wanted to be, old-fashioned, overt racism that was okay, and the patriarchy, and women stayed in the kitchen, which
they are pretty white.
Yeah, pretty white, exactly. And
except for one guy.
Except yes. I will segues me to this other thing, a similar point with Odin, played by Anthony Hopkins, who is reading his lines exactly the same way every time with the same sorts of inflections, adding no depth at all from Odin in the first film. And am I wrong? But is like Odin racist? Because he doesn't approve of Jane Foster and Thor together, and he says that that Thor should probably stay among his own kind. Pointing him towards Lady Sif. Yeah, I know we get the whole because mortals don't live that long, and you're gonna outlive her. But man, it sounded like like a father not approving of his son's choice in women because of their background.
I don't know if it's racist to me. It feels kind of like when Elrond didn't want Arwen to be with Aragorn. It's like, well, you're just gonna watch him die, and we're all gonna go keep on living. So it's like it's a waste. It's almost like Odin is almost like Q in this, not James Bond Q, but Star Trek Q, of like that he just sees the humans as little piddly playthings that aren't worth his time. We don't get that in the first movie. We also, I feel like Alan Taylor put no reins on Anthony Hopkins whatsoever, because not only, to your point, Elliot, is he using the same inflection for everything and not trying, he is chewing the scenery to a point I haven't seen since Coppola's Dracula. He hits T's. If I hit T's the way he would, this microphone would pop. When he says to Loki, he's like, "Your birthright." He puts a vowel at the end of birthright. And I just stood up like, what are you even doing in this?
That's why in any good Thor movie, the real villain has to be Odin. If you really think about it, in the two Thor movies that have been really good, the real or just good, depending on how you feel the first one, the real villain is always, deep down, is always Odin. Odin is the real cause of everything bad that happens.
That's actually that's in the comics too. I mean, Odin is kind of a bastard in the comic books. You get into right now with Jason Aaron's run. He's doing it's the Avengers 1 million BC or 1 billion BC, something like that. It's like the prehistoric Avengers, like the Flintstone Avengers, and Odin's an asshole, in there too. It's like there's never a time where you sit there and go, oh, isn't he a pretty cool dude, you know, a good king or just empathy. No, he's constantly about, you know, I want this, I want that, you bow to me. And like, oh man, it's just a bit much. So I guess they pulled that from the comics. I could not make your drink, Tom, because again, those things, but because it's the dark world, I am drinking dark rum. And at one point I was going to literally sit in the dark, kind of again, because that's where this, I hate to say it. All right. So this is this one time when in the review, because normally when I go back and watch the movies, for some reason I end up appreciating them a little more. Iron Man 2, not my favorite Iron Man film. I appreciate it a little more. Iron Man 3, which I actually did like, I ended up really liking even more. This is the first time I've seen a Marvel movie where I actually liked it less than when I watched it the first time. And I don't know if it's because of my weekend or the movie, but shouldn't this movie be enough to help me get out of whatever doldrums I'm in, right?
I had a long day at work, and watching Thor Dark World today made it longer. It was like I started it at lunch, and then I got emails during lunch, and then I paused it, and my first thought was like, well, now what time am I going to finish this thing? It's a drag. And you mentioned you mentioned that you were going to sit in the dark, which is not good for a video podcast. But also, this movie is called The Dark World. The story isn't dark, but this is the darkest movie. I started watching this at lunch. I had to close all my blinds to see what was going on. When they go to that like barren wasteland, which when you think it's the end of the movie, time. Yeah, it looks like a Snyder movie. It's just everything is cloudy and brown, and it's just it's dark because it's hard to watch in so many ways.
Well, they also kill a member of Thor's family in this movie, which is something that I think that they learned that you do need to do, because I remember on both on rewatch and on first watching that I thought that was kind of the best part of the movie when they had that big funeral with the flaming ships and all that jazz. I feel like for someone of Thor's power, you have to make him suffer. And I think that might be something, if we're talking about lessons from this movie that were then carried forward into subsequent films, of just like, and in every subsequent film in which Thor has appeared, someone close to him, either a direct family member or someone he really cares about, has died, which does not bode well, I guess, for Korg in the next movie. But you know, someone ends up dying. His mother dies in this movie. Loki is killed in Avengers Endgame, Avengers Infinity War. Odin dies in Ragnarok. I think Ultron is the only movie where someone doesn't immediately get killed, unless
Quicksilver will die.
Quicksilver will die. So that's something, R.I.P. Pietro. But someone has to die who's close to Thor in order to make that character compelling. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone died in the next Thor movie either.
Well, I mean, talk about Loki. I mean, you had that quote unquote twist at the end of the Dark World where you thought Loki had died, and no, he's still alive. And they quickly, Taika Waititi takes that whole thing, quickly makes a joke of it at the beginning of Ragnarok, and which brings me to the point about Tom Hiddleston. This is probably his weakest performance out of all the films as Loki. Even the scenes where he's supposed to be emotional, I wasn't buying it like I did in the first film. I know Tom Hiddleston's a much better actor than this, and the script just I didn't get it. It was like they knew, Loki we think he's going to double cross Thor, and he probably will. No, will he? Won't he? Will he? Won't he? But he did. No, he didn't. And it's like they didn't. They tried so hard with the script to keep doubling back on Loki's motivations. After a while, you're like, I don't even get it. I don't get what he wanted to do.
Yeah, I really think watching it this time, as we were talking about how Marvel tends to rewrite, I really think that Tom Hiddleston popped so much in Avengers, I think in a way that they didn't foresee. And I wouldn't be surprised if the original script had that scene in the beginning where they sent him to prison and he just stayed in prison the whole movie because the movie's not about him. Because when he exits the movie, when they fake his death, at the time in the theater, I was like, well, the movie's over, right? And there's 40 minutes left. So there's no way you wrote that movie with Loki where he's not in the third act. Like they built him up so much. I feel like, hey, we have space in the second act to do a lot of Loki stuff. So let's put Loki when we're going to do the Warriors 3 and the Sif stuff. Oh, and then he can double cross him and double cross him again. Because the whole escape from the jail too. I got a little lost when when Volstagg is fighting all the Asgardians. I was like, wait, why are the Asgardians mad at them? Because shouldn't they want Thor to fight the Dark Elves? I was like, are they mad that he freed Loki? Are they mad that he's taking Jane, who has the ether in her? And I wasn't even clear, and I've seen this movie probably 7 times. So I do think they just found every spot that was a little quiet where they could shove Loki in, and they just shoved Loki in. So his dialogue's not the best, and he probably didn't get a lot of time on set.
On the positive side, we get Chris Evans' cameo for 8 seconds. Like that, I remember being one of the better parts of the whole movie.
That's the highlight of the movie for me. That, like you said, 8 seconds he's on screen.
Dave, what other highlights, if any, were there for you in this film?
I said that is the highlight, not
that was it. So yeah, because I remember I saw that. I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's right. Chris Evans is in this. Oh, that was fun. That was it. That was kind of, oh, now we're back to eating our vegetables, I guess. Our dark
vegetables are good for you. This was more like eating cardboard.
Well, again, if we're talking about, because I do think that Marvel learned from this movie, because the parts of this movie that are watchable or rewatchable are the parts that are funny, like the Chris Evans cameo, and as I said, the parts where they kill one of Thor's family, and the parts that are funny. And I think that they did learn a little bit of that lesson, because from that point forward, when we see Thor, even in things like Infinity War, there is more like, we'll do a little more funny. We'll do a little more of this. Like, I do think that lesson was learned a little bit in this movie, or after this movie.
That actually, I was going to make John Elliott and John being the real kind of, knowledgeable comic book readers and avid Marvel fans here. How do you feel about the really significant shift in tone of how they portray Thor and like the tone of the Thor movies, going from the first two, particularly this one, to Ragnarok, where it almost becomes, Taika Waititi is, seems to be known more for comedy and kind of, subversive, kind of, wacky comedy. And it shows. It's like the way they hired him almost as like a, it was almost reactionary to this one. And, lo and behold, you wind up with probably the only one of the 3 Thor movies that seems to be universally enjoyed, where you don't usually have people citing, certainly not this one, as being one of their favorite Marvel movies. And then all of a sudden you have this third one it's soon to be more than a trilogy, but the third film that everyone just loves, but it came at the sort of the cost of really kind of depicting Thor in a really different way. But that also seems to, like Elliot mentioned earlier, seems to be at odds with how he's portrayed in the comics. But how do you feel about that? Like, it's not really faithful to the comics, but it seems to have done the job as far as sort of saving the character and making him more appealing to fans, which I guess is the whole point of these movies.
Thor comics don't sell. Let's be honest. It's not like he's a top seller. Even when the movies are out, it's they have put top name writers and artists on the book. You'll see a bump in the sales because of that, but it's not like they're consistently. It's certainly not Iron Man. Certainly not even the Captain America books, which sell better. Certainly not Batman. Although Batman and Wolverine are their own two entities of the two different companies. So just from that point of view, and as someone who only occasionally reads the Thor books, depending really on who's writing and drawing the book, I don't mind it. The first two movies that have already shown me that if Thor plays in straight Norse god of thunder dealio, I can take him in. I can take him in doses, but I don't know if I can take a whole movie of him like that.
Yeah, I've never been a big Thor fan. I was saying at the beginning of this, but I think my audio dropped out. Walt Simonson did a great job. I have that omnibus. That's kind of all I need. I've sampled. There's some runs I like Dan Jurgens did a decent run. J. Michael Straczynski did a pretty good run. Jason Aaron, I've heard great things, but I just not pulled into that. And when they first announced the Thor movie, I was like, oh, this gives them a reason to do fantasy because this is their Lord of the Rings. So this is a great place to play in an area that they're not going to play with anybody else. And they never did it. You know, they in the first film, Kenneth Branagh plays Asgard like it's heaven, and it's like he's a fallen angel. And in this movie, one of the things that really frustrates me about it, Tom, you were saying that the Dark Elves have like these cool grenades and laser guns. This is supposed to be a fantasy. Why do they have grenades and laser guns? And the spaceships that they're flying around in the middle of this movie, I realized I was like, oh, they're trying to be Star Wars. And they're not even trying to be the best of Star Wars. They're trying to be the prequels. And it's like, not only does this not work for Marvel, this really doesn't work for Thor. Like, this isn't their space movie. We're going to get Guardians of the Galaxy, which is their riff on Star Wars that works. So they're not even committed to that tone in this film. And I think when Taika shows up, I think the pressure's off. I think these were the weakest of the franchises for them. Chris Hemsworth was becoming a major star, and he was an Avenger, so they were just going to keep making these. And he's a young guy compared to Robert Downey, so he's not going to be like, I'm done jumping off of things. But I think when Taika came in, it was like, I want to go crazy with it and make it like the heavy metal movie and put Jeff Goldblum in it. I think they were like, yeah, fine, we can't lose. You know, and honestly, I wouldn't mind if the comics were more like the Taika movies. I'd probably read them.
Yeah.
Well, some of the mythology is more funny, and if you reading some of the Viking sagas, they are more.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay. I had to mute myself.
But some of the sagas and things like that do have moments of humor in that, and that there's a reason why these stories that are centuries old persist. You know, these were tales that were told around the fireside in wintertime when it's very dark and there's nothing to do because there's no crops to harvest. So you've got to come up with something to keep people entertained for the 5-6 months of constant darkness. So having things that are entertaining or funny is goes with the character, or at least in terms of the character's original Norse origin. You can do things like that, and I think you know, fantasy, I think, doesn't have to be serious 100% of the time, and I think they could do a straight fantasy within the Thor canon that was still funny. Taika could do a fantasy that's funny and humorous in the same way Ragnarok is, because fantasy can and is often funny.
Yeah, my main takeaway from what you said, Tom, is Thor's good if you have nothing else. if you're going to sit in the dark for 5 months or hear about Thor, you vote for Thor.
I'm not sure about that.
We have Spider-Man.
Well,
we don't need so much Thor.
I don't know about. I mean, I was very entertained when I did various courses on the Norse pantheon. It's a very deep pantheon. It extends to most of Northern Europe, including North Germany and Saxon mythologies and things like that. So it's consistent in some ways across most of Northern Europe, and we get texts from it from the time because there's a lot of overlap with when those languages started to be getting written down. There's not so much time between the written language and the oral tradition. So you get Snorri Sturluson writing in Iceland by the 14th century in terms of actually writing all this stuff down. So it's relatively fresh in people's minds. I was always entertained by it. I always thought that stuff was, things like Baldur and things like that, and some of the things like when I was watching the first Thor movie of like hearing about the frost giants, like and there's the dark elves and there's also the light elves, and actually in the original mythology, the dark elves they're kind of like the Morlocks in the Time Machine. They like live underground, and the light elves are like above. So it's like a duality. There's interesting stuff. There's good stuff within the underlying mythology to mine. If you were going to do more of a straight fantasy, they haven't chosen to do it. I mean, well, they did kind of do it in Ragnarok because you have the event of Ragnarok. You have the reference to Fenrir, the great wolf, who appears at Ragnarok in the mythology, and you have Surta, whose name literally gives us the word soot for I've got a Dave Matthews interlude here. So some of the in Hela, who represents the underworld, there's a lot of stuff we don't get a Baldur reference, which would have been nice.
Yeah, Baldur was a big character in the comics, and they've never really gotten to him. I think a lot of what Baldur has done in the comics, they've given to Heimdall. And certainly as they realized Idris Elba was such a powerful force in other movies, they started to use him more and more. But they've never even given an Easter egg of Baldur in the movies.
That would be a good thing to explore. I think that's something that's then we get Sif, but we don't get Baldur.
In the comics, Baldur is Thor's best friend. They're chums. They're like this. And I was a big Baldur fan in the comic from the comics. And there was Baldur. Of course, you had Sif. The Warriors 3, who I love. Hogun was my favorite of the Warriors 3. But then they kill him at the beginning of Infinity War. But maybe, who knows? They'll bring him back.
No, they killed. Well, we're jumping the timeline. These guys are going to get killed in Ragnarok.
Yeah, they get killed in Ragnarok.
It's going to murder all of them.
Yeah, so there's going to be a lot of.
But that's the thing with the wasted potential. As we said, Idris Elba has a small role. Fandral is recast in this movie as Zachary Levi, and given almost nothing to do, he's kind of doing Carrie Elwes in Princess Bride. Which is a Xerox of Errol Flynn. And Zachary Levi, in a couple of years, he had already done like 7 seasons of Chuck. He was already pretty well known, but within a couple of years, he'll be Shazam, which is
Captain Marvel.
Yeah. Well, if I say Captain Marvel on the Marvel podcast, we're going to think he's Brie Larson.
I'm sorry.
There's a whole history of litigation here we do not want to get into.
And because of Captain Marvel, and honestly, that could be half of our Captain Marvel podcast.
Let's be honest. You look at Wiz Comics #1, it's the Adventures of Captain Marvel.
Yeah, and we also can't call it Wiz Comics anymore.
Because they weren't DC back then either. But anyway.
As an attorney licensed to practice law in the state of Illinois, I'm going to have to recommend that this segment of the conversation cease immediately before we all get sued.
But I would watch Shazam over this any day. And, the same guy is in it. This movie is just not – I feel like this movie is trying to swim in upstream and go in the wrong direction, and it doesn't even get there. Like it's like, oh, we're gonna make it a sci-fi movie about possession, and it doesn't even really land on that theme. It just kind of meanders around, and it does a set piece here and a set piece there that don't even escalate. Like there's, as I said, when Loki seems to die, the movie feels like it's over, and it really isn't. There's like a whole nother act, and I don't know why.
Well, John, I can ask you a question. What lesson does Thor learn in this movie?
He don't learn any lesson. I think, because the lesson he should learn is not to trust Loki, but then he's kind of in on it, and then he's gonna have to trust Loki anyway. I don't know. Maybe it's just committing to Jane because she's mad at him that he never comes back after Thor 1 and that he never goes to see her during Avengers. And we get a post-credit scene where he comes back and kisses her. So it's not even part of the main story. The main story has that Loki has taken Odin's place. So you're right. You're right, Tom. There's no through line of this. It just seems like Marvel's like, well, we're going to make another Thor movie because it'll do well enough. I feel like they were committed to making movies of the three main characters again, which would be Iron Man 3, Captain America 2, and Thor 2, and then new characters, which would be Guardians of the Galaxy, and then we can get to Avengers. This movie doesn't really have a reason to live, and it actually bothers me that we're going to have things pay off like the Infinity Stone and the death of Frigate and other movies, because that means I have to watch this movie. I don't have to watch Incredible Hulk.
This movie is essentially like Iron Man 2. It takes the template of the first film, repeats it, does it a little bigger, a little more, and then boom. But it doesn't really find the character doesn't find itself till the third movie. I say much like with Iron Man 3. I don't want like this movie meanders. I don't want this show to meander. I think we've kind of like worn out everything that we can say about this film. Unless I'm wrong, unless someone really wants to give me a take on Thor: The Dark World that they haven't had a chance to sneak in. Now's the time to do it. You're silent.
Isn't this the movie where didn't the process of this like convince Natalie Portman to stay away from the MCU for the better part of a decade?
Yeah, but she is coming back
She's coming back
for Thor: Love and Thunder this summer, which we have a new trailer for, which is better than anything that happens in this movie. And she said she came back because of Taika. So his arrival will revolutionize this entire franchise in a way that this movie does not.
It makes you wonder what the franchise would have been like had they given Taika the reins from the very beginning. Had they just said, hey, like they did with James Gunn, that they just, hey, you know what? We have this character. You can do what you want with him. We're going to give you a trilogy of films. Go, do it, do your thing. Like you said in the beginning, John, they didn't. I was enthused from the first Thor because I thought, oh, they're going to give us really true Kirby Marvel now. Kirby-esque Marvel. And then the second one, they don't do it. And then James Gunn will end up giving us as much of Kirby Marvel as you can get in a film. And then Taika's going to come along and do some great. I mean, everything in in Ragnarok he pulls from Walt Simonson's book, which is excellently done. There are some shots straight out of the comic book that he puts into the movie, which is something that I have always kind of like criticized Zack Snyder for, because to me it felt like, a lack of imagination. Yet on Taika's part, it's not like he was constantly lifting everything from the comics. He was putting his own spin on it and going, oh, wow, that's actually quite clever. But, we'll see, and then it's going to make me sad because Guardians 3, that's going to be it. And then James Gunn's going to, he's already wrapped production on the holiday special with the Guardians holiday special. And then they'll be wrapping. I don't know if they've started production on Guardians 3, if they've been in production on Guardians 3. Then
I know they were doing them both back to back because they're having them all together. The one bright spot of that is that we're going to get Peacemaker season 2.
Yeah.
Which,
Yes.
You know, it's not Marvel, but I think Peacemaker season 1 is the best thing James Gunn has ever done.
I agree. And then we'll see. Then that might be it for James Gunn himself. Has also said he's kind of like the movie bits he's kind of worn out by it. Now he's willing to do more television. If HBO is going to let him do his thing on TV, that's probably where you get him.
He's going to go home and sleep on a pile of money and
with his beautiful wife. And if I were him, I would do the same thing.
There's commentary about this. There's things that I've been thinking about this movie in light of the ending of Game of Thrones. So I know that Game of Thrones had an influence on the tone, not just the director choice, but also on the kind of tone of this movie. There's something in there there's some comment to be made about what the influence of Game of Thrones on this movie and what the legacy of Game of Thrones is in generally. I don't know if I really have the time for it. I would need another drink to really talk about it. But there's an angle in there somewhere, you know, and talking about the relationship between this movie and Game of Thrones and what wound up happening with Game of Thrones years later.
Well, I remember when I went to go see this movie, knowing that a Game of Thrones director was working on it and outside of the special effects, let's be honest, all those special effects scenes with the starships and the flights through Asgard and all that cool SF, special, all that stuff. The director had nothing to do with that. It's essentially Marvel says, we're going to come up with our action set pieces. We're going to do it. You handle all the other stuff. So he had really no say in that. And it amazed me as I'm watching this film. I was like, man, these do not look like Asgardians. They look like cosplayers. The armor looks like plastic. Everything looks so artificial. And that's because of the lighting. There are things you can do to make things look more quote unquote real. None of that was happening here. Everything looked like it was high level cosplay to me. You talk about Doctor Who, right? All the Asgardians look like the Council of the Time Lords. They're like, with their elaborate helmets and all that, but it still looked like something that they made off a 3D printer. So, maybe I'm not going to blame the director. Maybe I should put that on the DP.
That was the same armor in the first Thor movie. They have that weird thing with the bifurcated helmet with the fin down the middle. That
it just didn't look right. And they're going, man, this all looks really cheesy and funkified. Whereas you're not going to see that in other movies. You're not going to see that in Ragnarok. You're not going to see that in any of the Guardians films where you have those fantastical elements and costumes. Things actually look grittier and more real. Whereas in this, it's like everything looked phony. So I don't remember ever seeing a scene in Game of Thrones where the costumes look like people in costume.
Some of those later mountain appearances, maybe.
Possibly.
But tonally with everything is very kind of serious and yet also kind of static at the same time. That kind of things like Cersei spending all of the final season basically drinking wine in front of a balcony, being very kind of, I forget who. I've seen that post on Facebook and Twitter a million times, but stuff like that where things going on and yet also being weirdly static and stiff are kind of things that show up in this movie that in retrospect, you kind of see.
At least Game of Thrones had locations that they filmed on, whereas everything in this film feels like soundstage. It just feels like, oh, that's a set. That's a set.
Yeah.
That's a set. So anyway. Again, we could go on, but we're at the fact that Dave is so incredibly quiet. I know he's gotten to the end of his notepad on anything he wanted to say about this film. He's like, I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. I got out most of what I wanted to say in like the first 10 minutes, 5 or 10.
Well, the next movie will be Captain America, the Winter Soldier. We're going to have a significant increase in quality and entertainment value in the next film. I know that I will say I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed Winter Soldier, as well as how much I always enjoyed the Winter Soldier. That's a movie that kind of like stays with you for a bit. You know, it's held up very well. And I have a moth in here that I want to be kind. I don't want to smack it, but he insists on floating around me right now. It's going to be a film that I know I've had several folks said they'd be willing to guest on this show to talk about the Winter Soldier. So, Tom, since I probably won't be able to get you back next week, do you have any quick thoughts you would like to offer on the Winter Soldier? I know we didn't talk about that, but I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, I've seen Winter Soldier many, many times, and I remember being in the theater and my heart just kind of pounding in my chest on that movie. If I were to put one bullet point on the Winter Soldier, the Captain America, the Winter Soldier, it's the Winter Soldier leitmotif. That little, it's a sound effect that low level sound effect. Anytime that he's on the screen, from the moment he's on the screen, is just great. It was like in Spider-Verse with the Prowler theme, where it's that kind of some kind of guttural sound in association with your kind of main villain. Whoever did that deserves an award in terms of being able to do something that over the course of the entire film feels really visceral and compelling. It's something that I really enjoyed, particularly about that movie. It's far from a perfect movie, but they're able to kind of keep you going and keep you invested in that. And the fight choreography is just, I felt, some of the best in the MCU. The fight between Steve and Bucky with the knife switching is just one of the cooler. Also, there's several guys that Captain America fights on that ship are definitely dead. I'm surprised that Batroc the Leaper comes back. Because I'm pretty sure that if you were kicked like that, that would be the end of you.
True. Especially with the force that Steve Rogers can kick you with. Yeah.
Right. If we see the force that Steve Rogers kicks, he basically breaks a guy in half by kicking him into the sidewall of that ship. But lots of little details in that movie are just really good. And that's the birth, you could say, of the subsequent MCU, because that's the debut of the Russo brothers. Coming from taking all their skills that they learned from the various paintball episodes of Community and really kind of bringing that to the fore. So that then becomes the model for a lot of what happens afterward. But I think that those are kind of the things that I remember most. I remember the Winter Soldier theme. I remember the pace and the speed of the movie and the fight choreography and how that really kind of, it was very, very successful. Very lots of little attention to detail in that movie, which is just great.
You want to drop real quick into the comments on our Facebook page. Susan Reed asks, is Elliot bored? I'm not bored with the conversation. My friend, our co-hosts and guests are always entertaining. The movie, regarding the, we don't want to meander about this. Hey, we could go back to the drinks review. I will say this, Tom, if you wouldn't mind, for our next MCU review, when we talk about the Winter Soldier, would you mind coming up with a drink, a themed drink for the Winter Soldier? You've got some time. We're not the next. We've got to be spaced these out. So if you're up to coming up with a themed drink for the Winter Soldier, I'd love to have it and share it and make sure I name it properly on our Facebook page. And then Susan does say, when it came to the movie, what did it need? Yes, it needed dragons. It needed dragons. Although it did have some snow creature that gets loose in England at one point, and it's brought back in the post-credit scene. So they did some. I wonder where it is today, is my question. Before we go, any final thoughts on Thor, The Dark World? Tom?
Better movies are coming. There are parts that I enjoyed, that I still enjoy. I remember liking it when I saw it in the theater. But better movies are coming, and thankfully this didn't end the franchise, and the characters like that we may not see for a while, like Darcy, like Jane, do eventually come back in some form or another. So that's good.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the weakest of the 3 Thors we've seen so far. I'm sure Love and Thunder will just up the ante even more. Hopefully build on what Taika Waititi did in Ragnarok. But yeah, I think at the all said and done, this will just be looked back on as one of the more forgettable entries in the series.
John?
This is the worst MCU film, and the next film is the turning point.
Is the worst, or would you? Is it
it's
worse
the
than
worst.
Hulk?
In my opinion, it's the absolute worst.
Okay, all right. I can see, because I'm thinking even Hulk had some things that I kind of the theme park ride aspect of Hulk in the beginning, like those first 20 minutes of Incredible Hulk. I was like, oh, this is fun, and then the movie like derails at one point.
Yeah, Hulk is entertaining, but it doesn't matter. This doesn't matter, and it's not entertaining.
Got it. Wow. And I wanna personally apologize to Chris Hemsworth for really not enjoying a movie that I'm sure he had fun making. I apologize to the cast and the crew and the directors and the writers, and I know it takes a lot of talented people to make these films, and I know that many of them are very proud of what they've done. And I probably will never, ever get to make a film like Thor: The Dark World. So y'all are better than me. But yeah, the movie did not get me out of the mood that I was in this past weekend, which I guess, who knows. Anyway, thanks to everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you, Leben. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for watching us on Facebook. Thank you for watching and commenting. Thank you for checking us out on Twitch and on YouTube. You can listen to the audio version of this show in another week on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. All you've got to do is ask your smart speaker to play the Caffeinated Comics Podcast, or subscribe to the Caffeinated Comics Podcast wherever you find your podcasts. We are part of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network, which means we're available on all your podcast servicing needs. So before we go, Tom, tell us, where can people see you, find you, talk to you, learn about you, anywhere on social media?
Don't. We've established that. I believe we were on Shaken Not Heard. You basically called me Daredevil of having a secret identity. So, all my social media accounts are very private. So, don't.
I know, it's like at one point I was trying to message you on the MCU ReVU account, and I wanted to follow you, and it says, "Oh, this account is private." So I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right."
I got pictures of my kids on there. That's what I use. I use my social media accounts for pictures of my kids and like radical left-wing politics. But
very good. That's what burner accounts are for. So don't follow Tom, but if you go to the MCU ReVU Facebook page and Instagram page, you can see the recipe for, what was it called again? You renamed it?
The Hugin and Moonin.
the Hugin and Moonin drink. And maybe
best luck is if you're in the Chicagoland area, you have luck finding these ingredients, or ideally visit the distilleries themselves. We have wonderful distilleries here in the city of Chicago. By all means, go and visit them firsthand now that COVID has died down and places have outdoor spaces. So by all means, visit them in person.
Maybe they'll make one. Maybe we can find a bar that will make it, put it on their drink list. But so yeah, and if you're up to it, Tom, I'd love to see your Winter Soldier drink for our next show. Dave,
something vodka.
I am on Instagram at Pinto_noir.
And John,
I am at Not in My Book on Twitter and Instagram, but apparently we are all supposed to leave Twitter today. So you can find me on Instagram, where I mostly post pictures of action figures.
Cool pictures. You didn't have a Thor to display today?
No, that's one of the problems with this. I usually do a segment for Marvel Legends. What Marvel Legends have been made for this movie? There were none. There was nothing made for Thor: The Dark World. We got a Marvel Legends set for Winter Soldier that year. We got nothing for this movie, which I think makes a lot of sense.
Makes sense. And of course, you can find me at Elliot Serrano on all the social media platforms. You can follow MCU ReVU as well on Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. If you go to our Instagram page, that's Instagram.com/MCU_ReVU, where you can find all the what we're going to be talking about the following episode. Share more fun things, observations, images, previews, whatever we can. And and if you quick shameless plug. If you follow me on my personal Facebook page as well as on my Instagram, I'm currently in the middle of a fundraiser in memory of my kitty cat, Sinbad the Survivor, trying to raise money for the Anti-Cruelty Society. Today, I actually got a retweet by Maxwell Jenkins, who played Will Robinson in Netflix Lost in Space series. Working on getting him as a guest in an upcoming episode of the MCU ReVU. Oh my God. Can you imagine? We would have Will freaking Robinson on this show. It would be a lot of fun to do that. Well, anyway. So thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching one of the archived version of this particular video, thanks for checking us out. Please give us a thumbs up, a like, a share, comment. Feel free to email us at mcurevu@gmail.com. Give us your comments. Tell us what you think. What are things you would like? Should we be talking about the Disney Plus shows when we get to that point? Should we include the Marvel series that were previously run on Netflix? Should we talk about the Spider-Man movies now that they have been folded into the overall continuity with their Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire appearing in Spider-Man No Way Home? We'd love to know what you think. So anyway, for myself, for John Clark, for Dave Pino, and Tom Jetner, thank you for watching the MCU ReVU. We'll see you again soon. Bye.